when my sister Ashley said it in front of everyone. You need to stop playing pretend entrepreneur. The words didn't hit like a slap. They cut deeper, in a quieter way. Her voice was sweet and amused, just loud enough for the room to turn its head, but not loud enough to seem cruel. That's the thing about Ashley. She doesn't stab, she slices with charm. We were standing at her anniversary party, a sleek wineglass crowd in a downtown rooftop loft. She wore a gold dress that shimmered when she moved, and I wore the same black suit I've worn to every family event since my divorce. I wasn't there to make a statement. I was there because she invited me. She said, "Come on, Maddie, be part of the fun." I didn't expect to be the entertainment. It wasn't the first time she'd joked about my projects. The candles, the handmade bags, the community gift boxes I curated with love and months of effort. She never saw them as business, just hobbies, crafts. She'd say, "Cute little things," but this time, it wasn't in a private moment or sisterly teasing. It was in front of her friends, her husband's colleagues, even our cousin Jen, the one who never stopped measuring us. I felt them look at me like I'd brought a paper boat to a yacht party. I smiled. I didn't correct her, but something inside me, something warm, old, and hopeful, went quiet, like a switch flipped, and a light I didn't know was on suddenly turned off. Ashley has always had a way of making herself the sun. The rest of us were meant to orbit. She never knew that behind her glow was the light I held steady, the money I gave when she needed to start her real estate company, the connections I passed along without credit, the designs I let her use on her company's brand kits. I thought we were building something together. I thought I was helping her fly, but maybe I was just holding the ladder so she could climb over me. People laughed lightly, not loud, but enough to let me know I'd become a joke. I sipped my champagne, felt the glass sweat against my fingertips, and stared out at the city skyline. I didn't cry, I didn't flinch, but I remembered everything, every dime I never asked her to repay, every idea I let her run with, every time I said, "It's okay, Ashley, you take the spotlight." And I knew, standing in that room, exactly what I had become in her eyes: invisible, replaceable, a sweet older sister who never made it, a punchline wrapped in politeness. But I wasn't angry. No, anger is loud. I've learned to be silent. I've learned that silence has its own weight, heavier than shouting, sharper than screaming. I watched her laugh and twirl and glow, and I knew something she didn't. I knew that the foundation she danced on was mine, the silent partner, the forgotten root beneath her blooming tree. And one day, roots remember how deep they go. I set my glass down gently. My fingers tapped once, twice on the rim, like a silent clock starting. I didn't stay for cake. I didn't make a scene. I walked toward the door, my heels quiet against the polished floor. No one stopped me. They were too busy being charmed by the woman who told the world I was just pretending. But I wasn't pretending. I was preparing. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I simply walked away. I came home to silence, not the peaceful kind that wraps around you after a long day, but the kind that lingers like a question left unanswered. The house sat still, like it was holding its breath. Its walls were familiar, yet distant, like someone you used to know deeply, and now pass on the street without a word. There were no voices echoing from the kitchen, no footsteps thumping upstairs, no laughter bouncing off the hallway tiles, just the hum of the refrigerator and the soft groan of old wood remembering its age. This house wasn't just where I lived. It was where I poured every drop of my youth. Every brick held a memory. Every window caught 1,000 sunsets I never stopped to admire. I chose this land with James, when our hands were still calloused from dreaming too big. We couldn't afford fancy finishes back then, so we made warmth out of small things. A mismatched couch, a second-hand table, holiday lights we never took down because they made the porch feel magical even in March. We built our life in layers: paint, plaster, sweat, love. I raised my children here. I watched them take their first steps across this kitchen tile. I cleaned their crayon drawings from this very wall, even though part of me wanted to keep them forever. I patched up scraped knees, made peanut butter sandwiches that no one appreciated until college, and stayed awake on stormy nights just to make sure no tree branch cracked through their window. My hands bled in this house. My back ached in it. My heart, it burst and broke in equal measure beneath this roof. Ashley once told her friends she grew up in a charming little fixer-upper. What she never said was that it was fixed with borrowed tools and late-night prayers. She forgot the nights we had power outages and I turned it into a game. She forgot the handmade Halloween costumes, The garage I turned into a makeshift studio so I could design while watching them play. She forgot that I sold my grandmother's necklace to replace the broken furnace. One bitter January, because Ashley had the flu and I couldn't risk her catching pneumonia. She forgot so much. But the house remembered. It remembered everything. I could still see the faded outline where the old family photo used to hang. The one Ashley insisted we replace with her college graduation portrait. I never put the old one back up. The frame sat in a box in the attic, next to other things they didn't want anymore: drawings, trophies, handmade gifts they outgrew. I used to think this house was alive with history. Now I realized it was dying from neglect. The laughter was gone. The warmth was gone. Only I remained, moving room to room like a ghost who couldn't leave. I tried for a while, to fill the silence with new memories. I hosted community dinners. I planted sunflowers in the backyard. I even painted the front door a shade of blue I thought looked brave, but nothing stayed. The light wouldn't settle. The warmth wouldn't return. And in my bones, I began to feel it, that this house wasn't just empty. It was grieving. I stood in the living room and let my fingers trail across the fireplace mantel. Once, these walls held joy. Now they held echoes, whispers of a family that used to be whole. I didn't cry. There was no one left to comfort me, no one left to hear. It used to be filled with love. Now it only remembered me. I don't think people ever realize the true cost of love until it's already spent, until you're left holding the receipt of years you can't get back. Decades, really. I gave them everything, not just money, though there was plenty of that, but time, belief, and pieces of myself I didn't know I was handing away. I gave my children the kind of love I never received, the kind that wraps around you like a blanket and says, even when you fail, you're still mine. I raised them on faith that if I kept giving, they'd never let me go cold. I remember the day Ashley got her college acceptance letter, Columbia. She came flying through the door, waving it in the air, crying with disbelief. I cried too. She never saw me kneel by the kitchen sink later that night, quietly doing the math. We couldn't afford it, but that didn't stop me. I sold half my art supplies, picked up late-night work designing party flyers, even dipped into the savings James and I had quietly kept for retirement. I told her she deserved it, and I meant it. She had dreams, and I would rather burn mine down than let hers go unfunded. And when Ethan proposed to her, she wanted a spring wedding with chandeliers and a lakeside venue. I told her we'd figure it out, and we did. I designed all the invitations myself, folded napkins into swans until my fingers cramped, and stayed up nights stitching lace into her veil because she wanted a touch of handmade. She didn't know the credit card company called twice during that month. I didn't let them bother her. Love, I believed, should never feel like a burden on the one receiving it, only the one giving it. I gave them the best of me. Birthdays with themed cakes and scavenger hunts, graduation parties with photo walls and speeches. I practiced in front of the mirror. I was always the woman holding the phone, filming the proudest moments, and clapping loudest from the back. When she got her first award at her real estate firm, I framed the article and mailed a copy to every family member. I celebrated her louder than she celebrated herself. I never asked for repayment. I never sent a bill for the emotional labor, the midnight phone calls, the heartbreak talks, the quiet moments I sat beside her in the dark just so she wouldn't feel alone. I never once said, "You owe me." Because love, real love, doesn't keep score. But now I see, maybe it should have. Because they didn't just forget, they rewrote the story. They turned me from a builder into a bystander. They paraded through life as if they built it brick by brick, forgetting the hands that mixed the cement. They smiled into cameras, stood on stages, and spoke of self-made success, while I stood at the edge of every photograph, just out of frame. That's the part that stings. Not the money, not even the coldness, but the erasure, the quiet edit of my role in their victories, the way they stripped me of dignity with a smile, like I was never there. They didn't just take what was mine, they took what I built for them. It started with a letter I wasn't supposed to receive, a plain envelope, no return address, tucked beneath a stack of junk mail, almost as if fate was daring me to overlook it. It was from the city assessor's office, a routine update about property, zoning, and the new co-ownership filings registered for the house. My house. I almost tossed it out, assuming it was a clerical error, but something inside me, that quiet, old instinct that wakes up when something isn't right, told me to read it again. Slower. There it was. A transfer. A partial title shift. Not to Ashley, not even to Ethan, but to a limited liability company, one registered under my own address, with Ashley's digital signature authorizing it. My name was still on the deed, but something had changed behind my back. It felt like the house beneath me had shifted. I sat down on the edge of the couch and stared at the paper as if it would rewrite itself if I blinked long enough. That night, I pulled out the fireproof box I'd kept locked for years. Inside were old records, our will, the insurance policies, James's final letters, and receipts from decades of our life. I hadn't opened it since he passed. I'd trusted her with everything after that. Trusted that Ashley, the daughter I raised with lullabies and second chances, would never dig under my feet while kissing my cheek. But page by page, I found the fractures. Quiet, careful edits to documents I once signed in trust. A power of attorney form I didn't recall signing. Digitally authorized, notarized remotely, dated 2 years ago. Around the time I was hospitalized with a fever and dehydration, I remembered being drowsy, vaguely agreeing to temporary forms she said were just for managing bills. I remembered her holding my hand and saying, "Just rest, Mom, I've got it all covered." She covered it. All right, covered it with lies. I checked bank records, quietly, slowly, like peeling back wallpaper and finding mold underneath. There were withdrawals I didn't make, transfers into joint accounts that weren't mine, business charges from marketing agencies tied to her company, billed from my accounts. Even some of my design templates were copyrighted under her name, registered and claimed without credit. She hadn't just forgotten me, she had written me out. I sat there, surrounded by papers that screamed betrayal in small print. The kind of betrayal that doesn't happen in a single moment, but over months, years, through deliberate decisions and careful lies. This wasn't carelessness, it was strategy, premeditated and cruel. She hadn't just taken advantage of me, she'd assumed I would never notice, that I was old, that I was soft, that I was tired, and for a while, maybe I was all three. But as I stared at the cold signatures and the tidy transactions, something inside me turned. The grief hardened, the ache sharpened into clarity. I thought of the lessons I'd taught her, how to write her first check, how to negotiate gently, how to get what you want without ever raising your voice. She'd learned it all from me. She just forgot I was still watching. They thought I was weak. They forgot who taught them strength. I didn't rush. That's the first rule of war. Don't act while your hands are still shaking. I gave myself 3 days. 3 days to grieve what I had lost. Not just money, but trust. Not just trust, but the illusion of being loved for who I was, and not for what I gave. I went about my routine like nothing had changed. I folded laundry. I swept the porch. I answered Ashley's texts with emojis and exclamation points like I always did. Smiley faces masking the storm. Let them believe I was still the fool in the rocking chair. Let them relax. But inside, I was building something. On the 4th morning, I called someone I hadn't spoken to in years. His name was Charles Weathers, my late husband's old friend and the only person I'd ever trusted with our wills. He was retired now, mostly consulting, living in a quiet little coastal town where no one knew the firepower of his mind. When he answered and I said my name, there was a pause, the kind that holds both memory and apology. "It's been too long," he said. I replied, "I need someone who remembers I was never stupid." Charles listened. He didn't interrupt. He let me walk through the trail of documents, the silent theft, the signatures that weren't mine. He only spoke once I finished. "Do you want to take them to court?" I said no, not yet. What I wanted wasn't noise. I didn't want headlines or courtrooms. I wanted precision, clean, undeniable proof, and control. We started quietly. He restructured my accounts, froze the ownership transfers under investigation, and secured the original copyright dates of all my design files, with times. Then he reissued ownership back under my name through a dormant LLC I had created years ago and forgotten about. "Funny thing," Charles said, "most people think hiding things in plain sight is clever, but you were always more dangerous when you were quiet." There was something beautiful about taking back control, not with a scream, with a signature, not with a slap, with a seal. I filed documents in the early hours, then watered my garden like nothing had changed. I baked banana bread while drafting letters to tax authorities. I smiled at neighbors while drafting an email to a journalist. I once helped get her start, now working at a major financial blog. I told her I had a story for her, not a scandal. A case study. What does it look like when someone steals power from a woman who gave it freely? I asked. She was intrigued. Each move was calculated, nothing reactive. I wasn't planning a scene, I was planning a reckoning. I started logging every text, every call, every fake apology Ashley might later offer. I kept a separate notebook, navy blue, no name on the front, and wrote down every time she smiled while lying. It wasn't for revenge, it was for documentation. Because one day, when she'd say, "I never meant to," I would show her the dates. I would show her how long she meant to. People think strength looks like standing up and shouting. No, strength is staying seated while you rebuild the entire game beneath the table. I wasn't broken, I was rebuilding. And I didn't need applause, I needed silence. Because revenge is loud only when done by fools. Mine would be silent. It didn't happen all at once. That's the thing about reckoning. It's not a lightning strike, it's a slow leak. A roof that sags just slightly more each day. I watched it begin from the distance of my silence, and that silence had weight. I saw the first crack appear in the sheen of their perfect world when the agency handling Ashley's marketing pulled out of a deal, citing intellectual property discrepancies. She posted about it on social media, calling it a minor misunderstanding. But I knew what they'd found when they looked deeper into the records. Charles helped me correct. Then there was the missed payment. The mortgage for her second investment property went unpaid, even though she swore they had passive income streams. The bank called not her, but me, because my name, for a brief window of months, had been tied as a guarantor without my knowledge. I didn't yell, I simply sent them the corrected paperwork, legal notices attached, and let them realize the house of cards had never been built on their own credit. It had been built on mine. One by one, the dominoes fell. Small at first, delayed contracts, rejected loans, a revoked certification for her company's mentorship program due to unverified authorship of training material, the same material I had written and given her years ago, now properly registered under my name. There were no explosions, no headlines, just erosion, quiet, constant erosion, like a river slowly carving away at the mountain they thought would never move. I heard from friends, not many, but enough. One told me Ashley looked tired at the last networking event. Another said she was snapping at Ethan in public, something she never used to do. My cousin Jen, always more snake than relative, sent me a message out of nowhere. "Is everything okay with Ashley's firm? People are whispering." I didn't answer. Let the whispers grow roots. The best part, Ashley didn't know it was me. That's the difference between retaliation and strategy. Retaliation wants credit, strategy wants results. I didn't want her to know I was behind it. I wanted her to look around and feel the floor give way, to wonder when the storm had started, and why she never saw it coming. But storms don't knock. They roll in on quiet thunder, on dark clouds that hide in plain sight. I stopped checking in. I stopped replying to her curated updates, the ones where she pretended nothing was wrong. But I watched through public filings, through mutual connections, through a private browser window and a growing list of bookmarks. I didn't feel joy. I felt balance. The kind of balance that comes when a crooked picture finally straightens itself out on the wall, not because you fixed it, but because the wall shifted. At night, when the house was dark and the only sound was the creak of its bones, I'd sit on the porch and breathe, not deeply, not dramatically, just steady. I was no longer the woman they underestimated. I was the silence they forgot to fear. And all the while, their sleep grew thinner, their voices louder, their world shakier. But I stayed still. They thought I disappeared. I was watching from the shadows. It started with a text. "Hey Mom, thinking of stopping by this weekend. Been too long." No apology, no question, just a performance of casual love. Like the past hadn't been hollowed out and exposed. I didn't answer. A day later, she followed it with a picture of an old cake I used to bake when they were kids. "Remember this? Ethan and I were just talking about it." I could see the cracks in her words, the reach, the way nostalgia becomes a tool when truth starts slipping through your fingers. By Sunday, she showed up. I heard the car pull into the driveway. I didn't move. Let her come to me. I watched through the sheer curtain as she stood on the porch, hesitating, holding a tray of something wrapped in foil. Her hair was pulled back too tight, her eyes shadowed. There was something unsteady in the way she stood, like she wasn't sure if she was knocking on the right door, or a locked one. 3 knocks, then silence. I opened it slowly, let the air stretch between us. She smiled. "Hi Mom," she said, her voice that soft, careful tone people use with dogs that might bite. I nodded, stepping aside. She walked in like a stranger, In a museum, eyes scanning everything, taking in what hadn't changed. She commented on a photo frame, on the smell of cinnamon in the air, on the warmth of the old fireplace, like she wasn't the one who'd let all the heat bleed out years ago. I made your lemon bars, she said, placing the tray down. I know they're your favorite. I sat, said nothing, just looked at her. She fidgeted, ran her fingers over the rim of her coffee cup. It's been a tough few weeks, she admitted, voice thin. You know how business is. Up and down, people being unfair, jealous, maybe. I waited. Then it came, the trembling in her voice. The edge of something real, or at least desperate enough to feel real. We were wondering if, maybe you'd consider helping us out. Just temporarily. You know, just like old times. You always had a way of keeping things afloat. I didn't flinch. She kept going, like someone reaching for a ledge they couldn't find. I know things got strange between us. I didn't mean to make you feel forgotten. I mean, you've always been the strong one, the one who made everything work. That part made me tilt my head. A compliment disguised as a guilt trap. I saw it for what it was, not a confession, but a strategy. She wasn't here to make things right. She was here to secure a safety net, and I had become the rope she once cut, now standing at the edge of her fall. I let her talk, let her dance in circles of false warmth, her voice rising and cracking, eyes shining with either tears or calculation. I watched her hands, the way they trembled slightly, then stilled when she thought I was softening. But I wasn't soft, I was patient, I was still, and stillness is the most dangerous thing in the world when you've wronged the person holding it. I poured her tea, not out of kindness, out of observation. I wanted to see how she held the cup, how she looked down into it like it might hold absolution. It didn't. She waited for me to speak. I didn't, because I didn't need to answer her. I had already answered the day I started planning. I had already spoken when I changed the locks, not on the doors, but on the parts of me they used to walk through freely. I listened, not to forgive, but to remember their tone. She came again on Thursday. This time, she brought Ethan with her. They stood on my porch like repentant teenagers called into the principal's office. She knocked once. He hovered behind her, hands in his coat pockets, eyes fixed on the porch railing like he wanted to disappear into the wood. I opened the door, not with warmth, with precision. Come in, I said. Not an invitation, an instruction. They stepped inside. I had already prepared the table, not with food, but with facts. A neatly arranged folder, a flash drive, two sealed envelopes. The fireplace crackled behind me, but there was no warmth in the room, just light, the kind that exposes what's been hiding in the dark too long. Ashley sat first. Ethan followed, slowly. They looked from the table to me, confusion softening into tension. I slid the folder forward. These are bank statements, I said. From the account you linked to your LLC using my name. She blinked, her lips parted as if to speak, but I held up a hand, not to silence her, just to keep the rhythm. This flash drive, I continued, contains recorded calls between your assistant and your accountant, discussing the transfer of copyrights from designs that I created, designs you claimed as your own. Ethan cleared his throat. Maddie, maybe we should. I didn't look at him. My eyes were on her. Always her. This letter, I said, tapping the sealed envelope, is from Charles Weathers. It outlines the legal reversals already filed. Your joint ownership has been revoked. Your power of attorney was nullified 2 weeks ago. You no longer have access to anything under my name. Ashley's fingers twitched on the table. Mom, I know exactly what you did, I said, gently. My voice wasn't raised. It didn't need to be. The truth is a scalpel. It doesn't bruise. It cuts clean. Her mouth trembled. You don't understand the pressure I was under. The business, it was all moving so fast, and you used me, I replied, because I loved you, because I trusted you, and because you counted on me never fighting back. Ethan shifted in his chair. We can fix this. You don't have to do all this. I turned to him, calm as ice. I already did. The room went still, the kind of stillness that comes after an earthquake, when everything fragile has already fallen. Ashley looked down at the table, then at me. Are you going to ruin us? No, I said. You did that yourselves. She reached out, hesitant, her fingers barely brushing the edge of the folder. Why now? Why not talk to me first? I gave a faint smile. Because you never listen when I talk. You only hear me when I whisper with evidence. There was no victory in my voice, only finality. I didn't want her destroyed. I wanted her accountable. I wanted her to see the mirror, not just her reflection in it, but the cracks she'd caused. She looked at me like she was trying to remember who I used to be. But that woman was gone, buried beneath years of sacrifice and silence. Now, I was something else. And with the kindest voice I'd ever used, I said, "Let's discuss how you'll make things right." They tried bargaining first. Ashley called 3 days later, voice shaking with effort to sound composed. "I've spoken with Ethan," she said, "and we're ready to make things right, financially, at least. We can wire some of the money back, just until everything settles." I didn't interrupt. I let her keep talking, letting her wrap herself in performative sincerity. She still didn't understand. This wasn't about dollars. It was about debt. Emotional, ethical, ancestral debt. I told her we'd meet in person. Neutral ground. A law office. Downtown glass walls. Nothing to hide. Charles sat beside me, quiet as ever, a witness and an anchor. Across the table, Ashley looked like someone trying to negotiate with a storm calm on the surface. But her hands betrayed her, twisting her ring, rubbing her thumb across her wrist like it held a pulse she was afraid to lose. The terms were clear. Full restitution. Every dollar taken through unauthorized access, repaid through certified transfers. The business assets she used my name to acquire would be surrendered or liquidated, not out of vengeance, out of principle. Next, a written and notarized public apology, not some vague social media post buried between lifestyle updates, but a clear, signed statement submitted to the local business journal, where she had once boasted about building her empire from scratch. She would acknowledge what was mine and admit what she had done. Lastly, a formal resignation from the mentorship board she sat on, the one that used my words, my work, my name, with a letter of withdrawal sent directly to the same young women she had claimed to uplift. She would step down, not in disgrace, but in truth. Ashley blinked, stunned. "You want me to ruin myself?" "No," I said. "I want you to correct yourself." She looked at Charles, then at me. "This will humiliate me." I shook my head gently. Humiliation is what happens when pride meets consequence. This is just justice. She slumped back, breath catching. "I thought you loved me." "I did," I replied. "Deeply. That's why this hurts instead of angers me." Ethan, to his credit, said nothing. Perhaps he finally understood the weight of silence. Perhaps he realized he had never been part of the center, just a shadow dancing beside someone else's fire. We signed, no ceremony, no sentiment. A week later, the apology was published. Simple, direct, devastating in its honesty. Friends called. A few sent cautious messages. One even said, "I always wondered how she rose so fast." I didn't answer any of them. The world didn't need my commentary. The truth didn't need a cheerleader. Then came the transfers, each amount marked, each date logged. They didn't bounce, they didn't delay. That told me she understood now, not just the legal threat, but the emotional one. The quiet way a mother's love, once discarded, can become the sharpest ledger of all. I didn't celebrate. There were no toasts, no satisfaction, only the calm of balance restored. She wasn't destroyed, she was disarmed, and in that, there was dignity not for her, but for me, because I didn't become what they were. I didn't claw back what was mine with rage. I reclaimed it with fact, with law, and with silence sharp enough to cut bone. I didn't ask for more than I was owed, but I didn't let them leave without paying, because mercy isn't free. Forgiveness has an invoice, and they paid in silence, not money.